The prevailing narrative of the T-34 is one of a war-winning weapon, a revolutionary design, a production marvel, the steel fist of the Red Army that blunted the German invasion. And that narrative is, in a strategic sense, true. But history, especially military history, is rarely a story of clean victories. For every tank that rolled into Berlin, there was a crew that never made it out of the Smolensk forests. And their story, the story of the T-34 as a machine of devastating cost, both to its enemies and to its own operators, is the one we must examine to understand the true nature of total war. We need to move past the spec sheet, the sloped armor, the powerful 76mm gun, the wide tracks. These are technical facts. The deeper truth lies in the consequence of its design philosophy and the horrific context of its deployment. The T-34 was not built to be a superior individual fighting vehicle in the German sense. It was built to be sufficient and to be built in staggering numbers, with the explicit understanding that its life expectancy on the battlefield would be measured in weeks, if not days. The design prioritized production, not the crew. Walk up to a T-34-76, the early war model. You'll notice the two-man turret. The commander is also the gunner. He is responsible for observing the battlefield, directing the driver, communicating with higher command if the radio even exists, most didn't, and laying the gun. This is a catastrophic cognitive load in combat. German tank commanders, operating from a three-man turret, observed. Their job was to see, to direct, to command. In a T-34, vision was an afterthought. The periscopes were crude, the hatch design often forced the commander to fight exposed. A buttoned-up T-34 crew was nearly blind compared to their adversaries. This wasn't an oversight, it was a trade-off. Simplifying the turret meant it could be stamped, welded, and assembled faster. The human element inside was a component to be used and expected to perform under impossible conditions. This philosophy extended to the very metal of the machine. To achieve those unprecedented production rates, quality control was often the first sacrifice. There are wartime reports of armor plates with visible slag inclusions, of improperly hardened steel that cracked under fire. Gearboxes were notoriously fragile, and a failed clutch often required removing the entire engine to repair, a death sentence under fire. The famous Christie suspension was robust but crude, and the ride was punishing for the crew. These weren't bugs to be worked out. They were embedded features of a system that calculated that having 10 tanks with faulty transmissions on the battlefield next Tuesday was better than having 5 flawless ones next month. The survival of the individual machine was irrelevant to the strategy. And so, we come to the most devastating aspect, the crew's reality. Consider the logistics of this so-called war-winning weapon. A T-34's diesel engine, while less flammable than gasoline, produced fumes that, when mixed with cordite smoke, filled the fighting compartment with a toxic haze. Ventilation was, honestly, poor. The crew shared their space with sharp, unpadded metal edges. In the event of a hit, even a non-penetrating one, the spalling, the shower of molten metal fragments blown off the interior wall, turned the tank into a blender. Crews knew this all too well. They would sometimes weld spare track links or even bed springs to the exterior as makeshift spaced armor, a desperate field modification born of grim experience. They weren't just fighting the enemy, they were fighting the limitations of their own machine. The doctrine was a mirror of the machine's design. The Soviet deep battle doctrine of the years 1943 to 45 didn't just use the T-34, it was built around its strengths and, honestly, its expendability. Massed armored fists would break through German lines, not through precision or local superiority, but through sheer, overwhelming volume. Tanks would be committed in waves. The first wave might be chewed up by German anti-tank screens, but it would absorb the fire, reveal the enemy positions, and then the second and third waves would pour through the gaps. It was a brutal arithmetic of attrition. A German tank crew aimed for a high kill ratio, a mark of skill. A T-34's role was to be part of a statistic, to be part of a wave that eventually, through cumulative pressure, collapsed the enemy line. The individual was, in a sense, sublimated to the system. The long shadow of this logic shapes warfare to this day. The T-34's legacy isn't just in sloped armor, which, became universal. It's in the total acceptance of a platform's disposability as a strategic principle. It validated the idea that technological parity or even inferiority could be offset by overwhelming quantitative advantage and a willingness to accept staggering losses. You can see this calculus in the armored doctrines of the Cold War, where NATO planners, acutely aware of the numerical superiority of Warsaw Pact forces, invested heavily in qualitatively superior tanks, like the Abrams and Leopard, designed for one-shot kills at extreme ranges. They were betting on the crew, on survival, on winning the exchange ratio. The ghost of the T-34 forced that response. Furthermore, for the survivalist, the lesson is stark. The best tool in the world is only as good as the system that supports it, the training of its user, and the doctrine of its employment. A symbol of strength can also be a vessel for devastating human cost. We remember the T-34 as an icon of victory, and well, it was. But true historical understanding requires us to hold two contradictory truths in mind at once. It was a weapon that helped save a nation, and it was a steel coffin for tens of thousands of its own crews. Its devastating nature cut both ways. To acknowledge this isn't to diminish the courage of the Red Army soldiers, but to understand the true harrowing price of their war. It moves us from a simple story of machines to a complex story of human endurance, of sacrifice, and of the brutal calculations that define existential conflict. Remembering that complexity is what allows us to learn from history, rather than merely repeat its legends. If you value this kind of grounded, unvarnished historical analysis, consider subscribing to War Machina. Share this video if you believe depth and context matter in understanding the machinery of history.